In the remote hills of Appalachia, tucked away from the prying eyes of modern America, lies the forgotten community of Echo Valley. This isolated pocket of civilization has existed for generations, separated from the outside world by dense forests and unforgiving terrain. Here in this secluded corner of West Virginia, a disturbing tale of blood bonds and twisted traditions unfolded, one that would eventually shock the nation. The year was 1974, when local authorities first received whispers about the Blackwood family. For over 70 years, the Blackwoods had carved out an existence on their sprawling 200-acre property, building a small but self-sufficient community. At the center of this isolated clan stood Eleanor Blackwood, the 67-year-old matriarch whose iron grip extended beyond mere family leadership. Eleanor wasn't just the head of the family, recalls former Sheriff Deputy James Harmon, who first investigated the case. She was like a sovereign ruler of her own little nation. Those people didn't follow state laws. They followed Eleanor's laws. The investigation began innocuously enough. A routine census worker, attempting to document the residents of the valley, reported unusual family arrangements and concerning health conditions among several children. What authorities discovered upon closer inspection would uncover generations of carefully orchestrated consanguinity, blood relationships deliberately maintained through a complex system of manipulated records and isolated breeding. Documents recovered from Eleanor's private study revealed her meticulous record-keeping. Birth certificates with falsified parentage, marriage licenses obtained through bribery of officials in neighboring counties, and most disturbing of all, a handwritten manifesto detailing her beliefs about blood purity and the supposed superior genetics of the Blackwood lineage. We found journals dating back to the 1920s, explains Dr. Margaret Chen, the forensic genealogist who helped authorities unravel the complex family tree. Eleanor's grandfather had begun this practice, believing that their family carried some kind of superior genetic makeup that needed to be preserved. Eleanor had taken this disturbing ideology and systematized it, creating an elaborate scheme to maintain what she called the untainted bloodline. The physical evidence of this generational inbreeding was painfully apparent. Medical examinations of the younger Blackwoods revealed a constellation of genetic disorders: polydactyly, extra fingers or toes, severe intellectual disabilities, congenital heart defects, and distinctive facial deformities. Many adults exhibited signs of recessive genetic conditions that had become amplified through generations of consanguineous unions. What made this case particularly shocking was Eleanor's methodical approach. Unlike other isolated instances of incest born from opportunity or pathology, the Blackwood situation represented something far more calculated: a deliberate, multi-generational program of human breeding. Check if you're already subscribed to this channel. You'll want to be notified immediately when new investigations drop, because these are the stories mainstream media is too afraid to cover in depth. Subscribe now to understand the darker side of human nature that shapes our society. Eleanor Blackwood's obsession with bloodline purity wasn't the product of mental illness, as many initially suspected. Born in 1907 to a wealthy family with connections to the early eugenics movement, she had received an unusual education steeped in now discredited theories about genetic superiority and racial purity. Her personal library, discovered during the investigation, contained first-edition works by eugenicists of the early 20th century, many with her own meticulous notes in the margins. Eleanor had taken these pseudoscientific ideas and applied them exclusively to her own family, developing a twisted belief that the Blackwood lineage possessed unique genetic qualities that needed to be preserved at all costs. What made Eleanor's case so disturbing wasn't just the incest, explains Dr. Chen. It was the calculated, almost clinical approach. She maintained detailed genetic records of each family member, tracking traits like a livestock breeder might document prized cattle. The system Eleanor devised was elaborate. Young Blackwood women who showed traits she deemed superior were paired with male cousins or uncles. Their children would then be evaluated for desirable characteristics. Those who met Eleanor's standards would later be incorporated into the breeding program, while those with obvious defects were relegated to labor roles within the compound. Most disturbing was her manipulation of official records. Through a combination of bribery, forgery, and exploitation of bureaucratic loopholes, Eleanor managed to register her own grandchildren as married couples. In some cases, she listed herself as the mother of her own grandchildren to obscure the true parentage and make the consanguineous relationships less obvious to outside authorities. The human cost of Eleanor's genetic experiment became clear as investigators interviewed the victims. Thomas Blackwood, who was both Eleanor's grandson and great-nephew, described a childhood where his future had been determined before his birth. "I was told from when I was 6 that I was promised to my cousin Sarah," Thomas revealed in court testimony. "We were raised together knowing we would be married when we turned 16. We didn't question it because we didn't know anything else. That was normal in our world." Sarah, who was both Thomas's first cousin and second cousin through different family lines, had given birth to 3 children by age 22. All suffered from genetic disorders, with 2 dying before reaching adolescence. The surviving child exhibited severe developmental delays and physical abnormalities consistent with inbreeding effects. Eleanor's control extended beyond just arranging unions. She maintained strict isolation for the community, permitting only certain members to interact with the outside world for necessary supplies and business dealings. Children were homeschooled using materials she personally approved, which emphasized the family's special heritage and the importance of keeping the bloodline pure. The Blackwood family's isolated existence might have continued indefinitely if not for a tragic accident in the summer of 1974, when 14-year-old Rebecca Blackwood suffered a severe seizure, a symptom of her congenital condition. The family was forced to seek outside medical help. The local hospital's questions about Rebecca's medical history and parentage triggered the investigation that would ultimately expose Eleanor's disturbing regime. Dr. William Hayes, the attending physician, immediately recognized signs of genetic disorders associated with consanguinity. "I'd studied these conditions in medical school, but I'd never seen such a concentration of recessive genetic traits in one patient," he recalled. "When I began asking about family history, the evasiveness of her caretakers raised immediate red flags. Rebecca's treatment exposed another horrifying aspect of Eleanor's regime, the denial of proper medical care to family members. Rather than risk outside discovery, Eleanor had developed her own system of family remedies and appointed certain women as healers who treated everything from common illnesses to childbirth complications without proper training. The consequences were devastating. Medical examiners would later discover a small family cemetery on the property, containing the graves of at least 14 children and young adults who had died from potentially treatable conditions. Autopsy reports indicated deaths from complications of congenital heart defects, untreated infections, and childbirth problems, all potentially preventable with modern medicine. Perhaps most chilling were the psychological effects on the family members. Having known no other way of life, many defended Eleanor's practices, even as authorities explained the harm being done. Years of isolation and indoctrination had normalized the abnormal, creating a community where the outside world, not their own situation, was viewed as threatening and strange. If you've been following this disturbing story, type "Blood is not destiny" in the comments below. It's important we acknowledge that genetic legacy doesn't determine our moral worth, and that we must protect the vulnerable from those who would sacrifice their well-being for twisted ideologies. For the younger generation, the psychological impact was particularly severe. Many exhibited symptoms of complex trauma, attachment disorders, and profound confusion about their identities upon learning their true relationships to one another. Learning that your sister was actually your mother, or that your spouse was also your cousin, created identity crises that would require years of specialized therapy. The children were victims twice over, explained Dr. Marlene Thompson, the clinical psychologist assigned to work with the rescued Blackwood children. First, as unwitting participants in Eleanor's genetic experiment, and second, when their entire understanding of their place in the world was shattered by the truth. When authorities finally moved to dismantle Eleanor's regime in late 1974, they faced an unexpected challenge. Many adult family members actively resisted rescue. Decades of isolation had created a community with its own value system, one that viewed outside intervention not as salvation, but as persecution. "We aren't doing anything wrong," insisted Joseph Blackwood, Eleanor's 45-year-old son who had fathered children with both his cousin and his niece. "Our family ways are our own business. The government has no right to tell us who we can love." This defense, framing consanguinity as a matter of personal freedom, reflected how thoroughly Eleanor had normalized these relationships within the family system. Most adult Blackwoods genuinely believed their arrangements were special, even superior to the random breeding of the outside world, as Eleanor called it. The legal proceedings that followed set precedents in several areas of family law. Prosecutors charged Eleanor with multiple counts of child endangerment, falsification of official records, and contributing to the delinquency of minors. Her defense team attempted to position the case as a matter of religious freedom and parental rights, but the extensive documentation of physical and psychological harm undermined these arguments. In a landmark ruling, Judge Robert Williamson sentenced Eleanor to 24 years in prison, effectively a life sentence for the then 68-year-old matriarch. "This court cannot allow the cloak of family autonomy to hide what amounts to generational child abuse," his verdict stated. "The deliberate orchestration of incestuous relationships with full knowledge of the physical and psychological harm such unions cause to offspring represents a profound moral failure and criminal negligence." The dismantling of the Blackwood compound raised difficult questions about the 37 children under age 18 living there. Many had complex medical needs and psychological conditioning that made conventional foster placements impossible. A specialized care facility was eventually established specifically for the younger Blackwoods, providing the medical treatment, education, and psychological support they had been denied. For the adults, integration into mainstream society proved exceptionally difficult. Having lived under Eleanor's regime their entire lives, many lacked basic social skills, education, and employable talents. Some eventually adapted to conventional life, while others drifted to the margins of society, unable to reconcile their upbringing with the wider world's values. The medical community gained valuable insights from studying the Blackwood case. The family tree provided rare documented evidence of the cumulative effects of multi-generational consanguinity, with genetic disorders becoming progressively more severe with each inbred generation. The case became a reference point in medical textbooks, though with identifying details changed to protect the victim's privacy. 45 years after authorities dismantled the Blackwood compound, the ripple effects of Eleanor's blood purity experiment continue to impact survivors and their descendants. The case, though less remembered by the general public, remains significant in medical, legal, and social work literature as an extreme example of isolated consanguinity and its consequences. Eleanor Blackwood died in prison in 1983, never expressing remorse for her actions. To the end, she maintained that the outside world had destroyed her genetically superior family project out of jealousy and misunderstanding. Her journals, now preserved in criminology archives, reveal a mind so convinced of its own twisted logic that no evidence could penetrate its certainty. The youngest victims of the Blackwood case are now middle-aged adults. Their journeys reflect the complex legacy of growing up within such extreme circumstances. Some, like Michael Blackwood, now using an adopted surname, have become advocates for child protection and genetic counseling. "I carry 57 genetic markers for hereditary diseases," Michael explained in a rare interview. "I made the decision never to have biological children because of this, but I've adopted 2 wonderful kids and broken the cycle of harm that began generations before I was born." Others continue to struggle. Long-term studies of the Blackwood descendants show higher than average rates of substance abuse, psychological disorders, and difficulty maintaining healthy relationships. For many, the knowledge of their origins remains a source of shame and confusion, despite extensive therapy. The legal precedents established in the Blackwood case have influenced how authorities respond to isolated communities where abuse may be occurring under the guise of religious or cultural practices. Social workers are now trained to recognize signs of genetic disorders that might indicate consanguinity, particularly in isolated or closed communities. Perhaps the most important legacy is educational. The Blackwood case is now used in genetic counseling programs to illustrate the very real consequences of consanguineous reproduction. The family tree, with identifying information removed, demonstrates how recessive genetic disorders become increasingly prevalent with each generation of related unions. What happened to the Blackwoods wasn't just about one controlling matriarch, concludes Dr. Chen. It was about the dangers of isolation, misinformation, and the manipulation of human beings in service to a flawed ideology. The tragedy is that Eleanor genuinely believed she was creating something superior, when in reality she was condemning generations of her descendants to suffering. As we reflect on this disturbing chapter in American history, we're reminded that even in the modern era, isolation and extremist ideologies can create pockets where scientific understanding is rejected and harmful practices continue. The Blackwood case stands as a somber warning about the human capacity for self-deception and the vital importance of protecting vulnerable individuals from those who would sacrifice their well-being on the altar of misguided beliefs. If you've watched this far, it's because you appreciate these deep dives into the hidden corners of human experience. Leave a comment saying, "I watched until the end," so I can get to know you and understand who truly values the stories on this channel. Don't forget to like this video and share it with anyone interested in understanding the complex interplay between genetics, isolation, and family dynamics. Subscribe now if you haven't already, because there are many more shocking true stories waiting to be told.